Hello, and welcome to Ontology Explained. I'm Casey Hart, philosopher and ontologist. And today, instead of doing a slideshow presentation, I want to do a tutorial. We're going to build an ontology, or at least part of an ontology, talking about events and situations. So, no matter what you do, when you are representing how things work in the real world, it's probably going to come up that you need to represent something that happened. And broadly, that's how I think of events, right? There's something that happens in time. There's sort of at least a start or an end point, hopefully both, maybe both. And you want to put that into your ontology. How do you go about doing it? So, in front of you on the screen here, we've got just sort of a shell for an ontology. And I'm going to try and put in a description. I was thinking about what event, what thing would be interesting. And I thought, let's go basketball. Let's go one of the most famous defensive plays of all time. Let's try and do a representation, at least of a sliver, of LeBron James' famous block in the 2016 NBA Finals, Game 7 on Andre Iguodala. You probably know what that is. I guess I don't know if you do. I don't know what the intersection of my following in the NBA is, but we can see the video real quick just so you know a point of reference here.
Iguodala to Curry, back to Iguodala, up for the layup. Oh, blocked by James. LeBron James with the rejection.
Wow. That in mind, let's represent it. Okay, so lots of ways we could split this up here. We've got our prefixes at the top of the document. I defined what this ontology is. We'll make up some classes and things as we go. We're going to need some individuals, right? So we're going to need LeBron James, and let's just say he's a basketball player, and we need Andre Iguodala, who is also a basketball player. We'll say other things about them. Maybe, I'm not going to go in way too much detail here because this could get crazy soon, right? Like we could write all the different teams of the NBA and describe the NBA and the commissioner and stuff like that. We just want to capture this particular block. All right. So here's one thing that we could say, right? Like one piece of data is LeBron James blocked Andre Iguodala. And that's good as far as it goes, right? We've got some new property, blocked, right? So we can have blocked, an owl object property, and then we can have the, a domain and range for basketball players and stuff like that. And this is fine if that's all that we want to say. Like maybe we want to enumerate all of the people that LeBron James has blocked, but there's already going to be a ton of problems with this. We're going to want to specify when this thing happened. And if we just have a single triple like this, it's going to be difficult to attach a time and date to it. There are ways that we can do that with RDF star, and I'm going to reserve talk about RDF star for a little bit later as just like a snippet. Instead, I'm going to show most of the time here with sort of my preferred way of representing events. This comes back from my time at Psychor. We call this Davidsonian representation. And instead of picking an active verb like this, right, and making all of our edges and properties sort of what is the verb that is happening, which is a tempting way to represent events, right? If I want to say I kicked a ball, right, Casey kicked ball, great. That seems reasonable. But then if you want to say more things about the event, you're really stuck by this framework of having to do triples. So instead, we want to create something else. We can have a class, right, of events. So event is an owl class. It's a subclass of owl thing. And we are going to represent this block, right, as an event. So we can have the block a event. And now we can think the way a Davidsonian representation was described to me is it makes the event like a Christmas tree, and then we're just going to hang everything else off of that Christmas tree. So the block is the thing that happened, and now we can say of that block when it happened, who it happened to, where it happened, right? All of these things are predicates that can hung off of the event. So what we have here and this is typically the way I do it. You don't have to do it exactly this way, but I like having an object property that is situation involves or event involves, which is an OWL object property. Domain is, so our object property here is going to take us from an event to something else, right? So it takes an event in the first slot, and it's going to return in the second slot basically any number of things, because an event can be related to a date, it can be related to a place, it can be related to another object, and then we can come up with more specific variants of situation involves that will say what is the role. I call these role predicates. What are the role that each of these things plays in this event? Right. So if we wanted to create a specific role for being the offensive player or defensive player in some basketball situation, we could do that. And you can get as fine-grained or as coarse-grained as you want with these situation involves pieces. But let's just talk about the block a little bit, right? So we can even leave it a little bit blank. We know that we want to relate this to LeBron James. We know that we want to relate this to Andre Iguodala. We know we want to put the date here somehow. What else do we want to say about this? I guess the thing that's being blocked, maybe we want the ball to show up. Spell ball like that and not like an ancient god. So we want all of those things. So let's say, what is our role predicate that we want to link this to? Who performed the block? LeBron James did the blocking. Andre Iguodala, maybe like it happened to him, right? So when we talk about, like, if you want to talk about action verbs or whatever, right, we have sort of the direct object and the indirect object, maybe something like that. So who's doing the blocking? It's LeBron James. He's sort of the subject of this. And who is being blocked? So the block has a done by of LeBron James and a recipient of Andre Iguodala. And then we can have sort of like an object used is the ball. And then we can do date of event. And then we can put a date in there. Usually the way I do this is with another blank node that contains the date, so I can say more stuff about this. We'll look at dates and times in more detail in another video, so I'm just going to be a little hand wavy about that here. So we can say universal dates, and then this was 2016. I'm looking up the date on my other screen, 6/19. Cool. And if we want to be more precise, we could use a date time, and that would be fine. Okay, and so now I've got LeBron James, I've got Andre Iguodala, I've got the ball, which is a NBA basketball, I don't know, something like that. Of course, we could say a ton more about that stuff if we want to. But by and large, this is the approach. So now, instead of saying something like this, LeBron James blocked Andre Iguodala, and then saying, okay, well, now how do we say more about that? How do we say, when it happened, or in what context, or what other things happened? We create an entity that stands for the event, and then we predicate things on that event, right? Again, this is a Christmas tree that we can hang off all the other information that we want. Right, we could mention the hoop, we could mention the court, we could mention the teams they play for. All of that stuff can then be connected to the block. So I'm gonna just prefer representations that look like this, except in like very rare cases where that like truncated representation will be sufficient for your purposes. And instead I'm gonna prefer something that creates the event and then says things about the event. This also allows us to create link events to each other by like causal, temporal, however you like it. So we can have something like 2016 NBA championship or something like that, right? That is winning the the title, this is an event, and it was done by the Cleveland Cavaliers, and then date of events. And actually, I can just reuse this because that was when they won Game 7, and therefore the series, and therefore the season title, right? And then we can do other things above here, right, where we say we link LeBron James, and we can say member of Cleveland Cavaliers. Now, you might be thinking about some more detail we could get into here. LeBron James is not timelessly a member of the Cleveland Cavaliers, right? He was a member of a specific iteration of the team, or a couple of different iterations of the team. He left, came back, different seasons. So maybe this is the organization, but maybe we want to represent each team as like a distinct team, or maybe we want to create another event or another situation about LeBron's tenure on the Cavs, right? This is something that will actually come up a lot. I know a bunch of you who are watching maybe are enjoying a basketball example, but thinking like you have a more professional case, right? A business case. Well, all the time, if I'm doing representations of HR, right? So who are the employees at a given company, right? That has this member of Cleveland Cavaliers vibe to it. I don't just say that I'm employed by, make up a random company, Amazon, right? I would say I have an employment contract with Amazon. That thing is a contract, and I can have the event of my employment, and my employer is Amazon, and I am the employee, right? And then that has a duration, a beginning and an end. So then instead of just having a single property that links me with Amazon, I have an event, and that event is linked to both me and Amazon. So that's probably a better way to go in general. Here I'll just be hand wavy and link LeBron to the Cavaliers, and the Cleveland Cavaliers were the doer of this winning the 2016 NBA championship, and that's got a date. And now I've got two events, right? And then we can talk about the relationship between the block and winning the 2016 NBA championship, which we could do any number of ways. Maybe the block is part of winning the championship, or we could say that the block caused winning the 2016 NBA championship. And then we're going to see that we've got connections between our different events. Often I will like to do like has sub events is a really common property to link one event to another, so we can have a parent event and then that's linked to all of the different components of it. It's sort of part-hood relationship. Lots of stuff that you can do here. I think that's sufficient for the main coverage of this topic, though. We'll see more examples. I'll do more tutorials. We'll see how this stuff comes out. But hopefully you should get the core idea here. In order to represent something that happens, create events, and then create a specific individual that is an instance of events, and then we can say a bunch of stuff about that links it to all the various role players in that event's happening, which includes the date, the doers, etc. One thing worth noting here, I talk above, you maybe picked up on this, I say situations, I said situation involves, I talk about events and situations. I have a particular thing in mind when I talk about events and situations, and that's this. I think of situation as an OWL class, and I usually make that a subclass of OWL thing. So OWL thing is our really top level class, and then I make events a subclass of situation. So I think of situation as just something that occurs in time. There's a beginning and ends. I think of event as something that is more dynamic. Situation can be just something very static. So I might talk about the a given relationship that's holding, like the keyboard sitting on the table. That's a situation. That's something that persists. I don't talk about the event of the keyboard being on the table, but I might talk about the event of me striking a key, or the event of me picking up the keyboard, or any number of things like that. So I think of events as dynamic, situations as being both static and dynamic, and I have situations sitting at the top there. I'm going to be very honest with you. I think I'd probably be fine if I just used event most of the time, or just situation most of the time. It feels like there's a more principled metaphysical distinction there. And because of my felt distinction there, that's something that I've pushed on. I know a number of other people that have done the same thing, and those are smart people that I really respect. So that makes me think there's a little more to it, but it's ongoing investigation about how practical that is. If you find yourself just wanting to use event and you're like, I don't see any like extra oomph that I'm getting from this distinction, don't worry about it too much. Just bear that in mind. But that does bring up, if we want to talk about more persisting relationships that are static, right? Something like a situation, or you could think of them as events where there's not a whole lot of change happening, as being a plausible way to do it, right? So an example there, if I want to say something like, you know, LeBron James is married to, let me just see who he's married to. That's right, Savannah James, right? So I want to say LeBron James married to Savannah James. Great. That seems plausible, but that's got the same issue that LeBron James blocked Andre Iguodala does, right? Like, okay, well, they haven't been married forever. There's a beginning and end to it. Well, you know, no yet. I'm sorry. I'm not trying to end your marriage, LeBron. There may be an end to it at some point. At some point, one of you is going to pass away. So how are we going to handle that stuff? Well, if we just have this single married to predicate, it's difficult, right? Again, we'll get to RDF star in just a second. But we have an alternative, right? And that alternative is just to represent LeBron and Savannah's marriage, right? And that's a situation or event or relationship. We can create subclasses as you want, and that has a participant, LeBron James, and Savannah James. Cool. And now I can say there's a date of event for that. I don't know when they were married, but we can make something up here. Let's see here. Does it say on the Wikipedia? No. So I'll just say that they were married in 2010. Great. Cool. So now we've got a situation, we've got a persisting relationship, and we can say other things about it if we want. We can have, like we can, instead of just making this a data event, we can have a start date, and we can distinguish that from an end date if someone ever becomes divorced, or in the case here when we're thinking about representing his tenure with the Cavs, or if you want to talk about your employment contract with Amazon, or whatever the case may be, you can swap that up as well. All right, this gives you the tools to create events, say things about them, be creative, go wild. If you have questions about specific applications, throw them down in the chat, in the comments if you'd like. I'm happy to talk about these, and I'll do more examples. Events come up a lot, so when you look at future tutorials that I do, I promise you there'll be more of this, and you'll see some of the specific vocabulary that I come up with. The last thing that I'll say on coming up with vocabulary is you might create sub-events or subclasses of events, right? So like maybe I create, or here we can say a marriage, right, is RDFS subclass of situation. Maybe it's a relationship or something like that. And then we can specify things that all marriages have. Like marriages all need to have at least two person participants. And they need to be supported by some legal institution or something like that, right? So we can put stuff on it that we can use for inference later, and that stuff that you put on it will then mean when someone creates an instance of a marriage, you can even use data validation to go back and check and make sure they've asserted the things you need them to assert about it. You can do that using Shackle. You can do that doing like a series of queries that run as some sort of regression loop. I've done this in a number of times. So if I'm representing, say, in my personal ontology, I represent like my weightlifting workouts. And I go through there and I make sure that every lift that I do, I specify what the weight was for the lift, even if that's just like body weight or something like that, right? You can have validation. I say, here's a type of event, and every one of these type events needs to have this information on it. Great way for you to do that data validation and ensure that your data has the quality that you want it to have. Okay. Now let's briefly talk about RDF star. This is a topic that is worthy of a lot more coverage later. It's a technology or a standard that I'm personally pretty skeptical about, although I know some really smart people who like it. So that makes me at least a little bit open to it. But the alternative here is, instead of creating the events, let's say we were really set on saying that LeBron James blocked Andre Iguodala, right? This is the sentence that we want to go with. How are we going to be able to leverage this without creating a new event? Well, we can think of this is just a sentence, right? LeBron James blocked Andre Iguodala, and then we can say things about when that sentence was true. So that can be our mechanism for creating the assertions that we want to say. So essentially, what RDF star does is it creates a new thing, right? Which is just this whole thing bundled up as a single sentence, and then we say things about this sentence, like the date of events that it was uttered, right? And that's just our way to go back and link with this thing, when it happened, who the participants were, what the impacts were, like this sentence being true caused another sentence to be true. There's a lot to say here about whether we're talking about the sentence then, or whether we're talking about the event. And if we're talking about the sentence, are we talking about like the RDF sentence or the proposition? Stuff gets a little weird if you want to get into the philosophy of it. But essentially, what I hope you can see from the brief bit that I've done here, we're kind of doing the same move, actually, right? So instead of asserting a triple and then saying, well, how are we going to say other things about this triple? We turn that triple into a single object. Now it's a sentence. And then of that single object, we can hang all the other stuff off. So again, this is the Davidsonian approach of we create a Christmas tree and then we hang all the other ornaments off of it that we want to. So fundamentally, RDF star is a thing that's out there. It's growing ahead of steam. I think this may even be outdated by the time that you hear it, but there were things in the W3C where working groups were trying to establish it as an accepted and supported standard for ways to talk about sentences and arrayify things. Great. Look into that if that's something you're interested in. But this core strategy of take a thing that happens, create a single entity that represents it, and then hang a bunch of stuff off of it because we're talking about triples, that still works. All right. Beautiful. Thanks so much for going through this tutorial with me. I hope you found this profitable and that it helped you understand better how to represent events and situations. I'm going back and forth on different ways to present this material, so if you've got a second, go ahead and drop a comment below and tell me whether you like this. Do you prefer sort of slideshow approaches, or do you like something where you see some code being written and it makes me smaller in the corner of the screen, so you have to see less of me? It's probably a bonus. Thanks again. Like and subscribe. Look forward to seeing you for the next one. Bye, guys.